Xi Jinping wields almost unlimited power inside China. But that doesn't mean he's fearless. Quite the opposite. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Remember, we're still in phase 2 of Operation Honeypot, so be sure to click on my videos in your recommended feed, watch this video to the end, and leave a like and honeypot comment. Xi Jinping is living in fear. Is it from the might of the US military? The possibility of being backstabbed by a rival within the Chinese Communist Party? A revolution in China sparked by his own failed policies? No. Kid stuff. What really keeps Xi up at night is dance. If your communist dictator doesn't dance, then he's no friend of mine. That's right. Of all the problems facing China right now, the Communist Party seems to be hyper-focused on Shenyun, the classical Chinese song and dance show started by Falun Gong practitioners in New York. China before communism. I'm sure you've seen their ads. Everywhere. Everywhere. Everywhere! Move over, Elon. Shenyun has already made it to Mars. You might think I'm kidding about the CCP caring about this classical dance show / internet meme. But the CCP is actually behind campaigns in each of these cities to attack Shenyun. I'm talking bomb threats, mass shooting threats, and diplomatic pressure. Frankly, the CCP seemed a little obsessed. Now, I've seen Shenyun, but the CCP freaking out over it this much makes me want to watch it again. As I previously reported, according to leaked internal documents, there's been a new push from within the Chinese Communist Party to fully eliminate Falun Gong worldwide. And Shenyun is their primary target. Because, as I said, Shenyun was started by Falun Gong practitioners. Suspected CCP operatives are sending dozens of emails with bomb and assassination threats to theaters, to Shenyun itself, and to members of the U.S. Congress who support Falun Gong. This is a clear case of transnational repression. That's where the CCP tries to export its persecution of dissidents to other countries like the US. And I don't think the Trump administration is very fond of getting threats from the CCP. The US State Department is now speaking out against the global attacks on Shenyun, saying we condemn such acts of intimidation and urge protection of the right to free expression, and calling on the Chinese Communist Party to end its now 25-year campaign to eradicate Falun Gong. Part of that campaign is, according to the leaked documents I mentioned earlier, a propaganda campaign in the West to portray Falun Gong as bizarre, threatening, intolerant, and otherwise undeserving of sympathy or respect. And it seems like the New York Times is ground zero. We are living in insane times with war, economic distress, and a country divided by partisan politics. But for the prestigious New York Times, clearly, the most important thing to be covering is the evils of Shenyun, the classical Chinese dance show started by persecuted Chinese dissidents. From the same newspaper that for years brought you China Watch, the full-spread articles that were actually advertisements written and paid for by Chinese state-run media. But it's still hard to believe that considering everything happening in the world right now, the New York Times decided to devote 2 reporters to work for over a year on at least 10 hit pieces on Shenyun, supposedly with more coming soon. This series of articles portray Shenyun as an abusive environment that exploits young people for profit, led by the founder of Falun Gong, who has somehow hoodwinked his zealot followers. To back up those claims, the Times relies almost entirely on interviews with 7 disgruntled former performers, who were either asked to leave by the company or left on bad terms. Considering Shenyun has been around for 15 years and has employed over 1,000 people, that's a very small sample size. Not only that, some of those interviewees have undisclosed ties to the Beijing Dance Academy, a Chinese state-funded company which just so happens to be the only major competitor to Shenyun. And it's even weirder that there's a Chinese YouTuber who said that he was the one who introduced these former Shenyun dancers to the New York Times. He had previously had some of them on his YouTube channel. That YouTuber has spent years targeting Falun Gong and Shenyun, including threatening violence. In fact, he's facing illegal weapons charges after being caught around Shenyun's campus. And according to leaked documents, China's Ministry of Public Security is providing full support to this same YouTuber. Yeah, that's not shady. And get this, before the New York Times published those articles, they were warned about all these conflicts of interest, but they published anyway. And despite literally hundreds of former Shenyun dancers saying they've had very positive experiences with the company, the New York Times continues to put out these hit pieces based on what 7 people said. Now, I'm not saying the people the New York Times interviewed are lying. They could very well have had bad experiences. But it's basically their word against everyone else's. And only their side gets featured in the Times articles, which means the New York Times is pushing a narrative. And unless there's an agenda, it makes no sense for the New York Times to put these kinds of resources into a 10-plus article series. But the CCP sure is happy that the New York Times is portraying Shenyun and Falun Gong as a weird, abusive cult. The Chinese Communist Party is objectively doing horrendous things to Falun Gong in China. And they're also behind some pretty horrible things happening to Shenyun in the US. I didn't even mention things like slashing Shenyun tour bus tires. That's basically attempted murder. A bus tire explodes on a freeway, and all those people on board could die. The Justice Department recently arrested 2 Chinese spies who tried to bribe an IRS agent to take away Shenyun's nonprofit tax-exempt status. Fortunately, they got caught and went to prison. And as I mentioned earlier, there's been an outpouring of support from all levels of the U.S. government for Shenyun, under both the Biden and Trump administrations. But the smear campaign by the New York Times helps the CCP. It makes Shenyun seem weird. It isolates them. So the U.S. government and normal people won't help them when they're literally being targeted by the world's biggest authoritarian regime. I wish the New York Times would devote the same resources to exposing the Chinese Communist Party's vast, industrialized system of forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience. That doesn't just affect Falun Gong practitioners, though they make up the biggest portion of the victims. The CCP also targets Uyghur Muslims and Tibetans and house Christians. Basically, if the CCP hates you, they will kill you and sell your organs. But even as that story has evolved into a global scandal, the New York Times hasn't once published an investigation on it. In fact, in this series of articles attacking Shenyun, the reporters quote a lone so-called expert who denies it's even happening, despite the many other researchers, journalists, lawyers, and doctors who have testified before Congress about how this is really happening, or the NGOs that have written reports on it, or the peer-reviewed articles in medical journals about it, or the 8 United Nations special rapporteurs who are alarmed by it, or the independent International China Tribunal that amassed hundreds of pages of evidence about organ harvesting. The U.S. House of Representatives has passed 2 different bills targeting China's forced organ harvesting, and Speaker of the House Mike Johnson even publicly talked about it. And yet the New York Times denies it's happening? Why? Well, a former New York Times reporter testified to the China Tribunal that she tried to do a series of investigations into China's forced organ harvesting, but her New York Times editors shut her down. According to her testimony, the issue was unwelcome at the New York Times. Interesting. The fact of the matter is, Falun Gong has been subjected to one of the most brutal persecutions in modern history, and it's been largely ignored by the most influential media. And yet, never has Falun Gong resorted to violence. Even its harshest critics don't claim that. Falun Gong made a dance show and put up a truckload of billboards. I, for one, look forward to seeing Shenyun again on Mars. Now, if you've made it this far into the video, you're clearly the kind of person who wants to stay informed about what's happening in China, and not by reading the New York Times, which is why I invite you to join us on our premium website at ChinaUncensored.tv. We do exclusive episodes every week only for subscribers, like this one about how the CCP has created a nation of trauma and what that means for China's future. When you join our website, you'll also get exclusive live streams, interviews with China experts, and be able to chat directly with me. Plus, you'll be supporting our small independent media company that covers China way better than the New York Times. I'm Chris Chappell. See you soon.